I watched her face crumble like paper when she realized the black man in the wheelchair she just humiliated was about to decide her fate, and mine. Which country are you listening from? Tell us in the comments below. My name is Jasmine Williams and I'm 32 years old. For the past 6 years, I've been working as a loan officer at First National Bank in downtown Atlanta. It's one of those glass tower buildings that reflects the Georgia sun so brilliantly you need sunglasses just to look up at it from the sidewalk. The building stretches 35 floors into the sky, a monument to financial power and southern prosperity that can be seen from miles away. I'd worked my way up from a teller position, studying finance at night school while raising my daughter Amara as a single mother. Those were the hardest years of my life, coming home exhausted from 8 hours of counting money and processing transactions, only to crack open textbooks on corporate finance and investment banking while Amara did her homework at the kitchen table beside me. Some nights, I'd fall asleep with my face pressed against pages of economic theory, only to wake up at 5 a.m. to start the cycle all over again. But we made it work. Amara learned to be independent early, making her own breakfast while I studied for exams, understanding why mommy couldn't always attend every school function. She never complained, not once. Instead, she'd bring me cups of hot chocolate while I worked on case studies and tell me about her day in careful, quiet whispers so she wouldn't disturb my concentration. Life wasn't easy, but it was ours. Every morning, I'd put on my carefully pressed blazer. I had 3 of them, rotating them throughout the week and dry cleaning them on alternating weekends, straighten my natural hair into a professional bun, and walk through those revolving doors with my head held high. The security guards knew me by name, the cleaning staff would wave as I passed, and I felt like I belonged in this tower of ambition and success. I loved my job, helping families secure loans for their first homes, watching small business owners' dreams come to life with the right financing. There's something magical about being part of someone's American dream, you know? When a young couple sits across from your desk, nervous and hopeful, clutching bank statements and tax returns like they're holding their future in their hands, and then you get to tell them yes, that they qualify for the loan, that they can buy that little house with the white picket fence they've been driving by every Sunday after church. Those moments made every late night of studying worth it. My colleagues were mostly pleasant. There was Tom Henderson, the jovial senior loan officer who always brought donuts on Fridays, glazed for himself, jelly-filled for Sarah in accounting, and chocolate sprinkles for me because he remembered they were my favorite. Tom had been with the bank for 28 years and knew every policy, every procedure, every trick for helping customers find the financing they needed. He treated me like the daughter he never had, always offering advice about career advancement and asking about Amara's report cards. Then there was Sarah Mitchell from accounting, who shared photos of her golden retriever Murphy every Monday morning and had an infectious laugh that could brighten even the dreariest Georgia winter day. Sarah had started at the bank just 6 months before me, and we'd bonded over being the youngest employees in our respective departments. We'd grab lunch together at the sandwich shop across the street, comparing notes about difficult customers and sharing dreams about where our careers might take us. The office environment was generally supportive and collaborative. We had monthly team meetings where everyone's contributions were acknowledged, quarterly training sessions on new banking regulations, and an annual Christmas party that was actually fun instead of awkwardly corporate. Mr. Reynolds, the branch manager, maintained an open-door policy and genuinely seemed to care about employee satisfaction and professional development. But then there was Brittany Chin, the assistant manager who'd started just 2 months after me but somehow climbed the ladder faster. Brittany was undeniably smart. She had an MBA from Emory University and could quote federal banking regulations from memory. She was efficient, organized, and had a talent for streamlining processes that impressed upper management. On paper, she was the perfect employee. In person, however, Brittany had this way of making little comments that felt like paper cuts, small enough to ignore individually, but they accumulated over time until you couldn't help but notice the pattern. "Oh, Jasmine, you're so articulate for someone from your background," she'd say with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, her head tilted in that particular way that suggested surprise at my competence. Or, "I love how you can connect with our diverse clientele." The pause before diverse always hung in the air like smoke, loaded with implications she never quite spelled out. When I'd wear my hair in its natural texture, she'd comment on how brave I was to try ethnic styles in a professional environment. When I'd mention Amara's achievements at school, she'd nod sympathetically and say things like, "It must be so hard being a single mother. I don't know how you manage to stay focused on work with all that responsibility at home." The concern was always delivered with such apparent sincerity that calling her out would have made me look paranoid or oversensitive. During team meetings, she had a habit of rephrasing my ideas and presenting them as her own improvements. If I suggested implementing a new customer follow-up system, she'd nod thoughtfully and then say, "That's interesting, Jasmine. Building on that thought, what if we created a comprehensive customer retention strategy?" And somehow, by the end of the meeting, the comprehensive customer retention strategy would be credited to Brittany's innovative thinking. I'd learned to navigate these microaggressions with grace, the way my grandmother had taught me to navigate the subtle racism of the South. "Baby," she used to say, stirring her famous peach cobbler while dispensing wisdom in her tiny kitchen, "you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. Some people are gonna test you, gonna try to make you small so they can feel big. But you keep your head up, you do your work, and you let your excellence speak louder than their ignorance." So I smiled, documented my ideas in emails before meetings, did my job excellently and focused on my goals. I was up for promotion to senior loan officer, the same position Tom would be vacating when he retired next month. It would mean a significant raise from $48,000 to $67,000 annually, better benefits including health insurance that would actually cover Amara's dental work, and finally the financial stability we deserved. More than that, it would put me on track for management positions and the kind of career growth that could eventually pay for Amara's college education without drowning us in debt. The promotion wasn't guaranteed though. There were 3 internal candidates: myself, David Kumar from the Commercial Lending Department, and Patricia Wong from Customer Service. We all had strong performance records, but I knew my customer satisfaction scores were the highest, and I'd brought in more new business than either of my competitors over the past year. Still, in a corporate environment, politics and perception could matter as much as performance. Brittany, as assistant manager, would have significant input on the promotion decision. She'd been conducting informal interviews with all the candidates, supposedly to provide recommendations to Mr. Reynolds and the regional management team. My interview with her had been tense. She'd asked pointed questions about my leadership style, and whether I thought I could command respect from colleagues who might not be comfortable with certain types of authority figures. The subtext was clear, even if the actual text remained diplomatically vague. The morning everything changed like any other Tuesday in March. I arrived at the bank at 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes before my shift, as was my habit. The morning air was crisp and carried the promise of spring, with dogwood trees beginning to bloom along Peachtree Street. The marble lobby was gleaming under the crystal chandeliers, recently cleaned and polished to maintain the bank's image of prosperity and reliability. Mr. Johnson, the security guard, not to be confused with the Mr. Johnson who would change my life later that day, greeted me with his usual warm smile. William Johnson was a retired Atlanta police officer who'd been working bank security for the past 8 years, and he knew every employee by name along with details about their families and personal lives. "Morning, Ms. Williams. How's that little girl of yours doing?" "Growing too fast, Mr. Johnson. She's already talking about college and she's only 10. Yesterday she announced she wants to be a marine biologist and study sharks." He chuckled, his deep voice echoing slightly in the marble space. "Smart girl. Gets it from her mama. Sharks how? That girl's got ambition. Not too many folks want to swim with predators for a living." I told her she could study anything she wanted as long as she worked hard and treated people right. That's good parenting right there. You raised her right, Ms. Williams. I settled into my workspace, technically a cubicle, but I'd managed to negotiate for one of the larger ones near the window. I'd decorated it carefully with a small succulent plant that didn't require much maintenance, a photo of Amara at her last school play where she played a tree in the environmental awareness production, and a small framed quote from Maya Angelou: "Success is liking yourself, liking what you do, and liking how you do it." The morning flew by with routine tasks that had become second nature over the years. I reviewed loan applications, checking credit scores and debt-to-income ratios with practiced efficiency. I returned calls from clients who had questions about their payment schedules or wanted to discuss refinancing options. I updated client files in our computer system, ensuring that every interaction was properly documented for compliance purposes. I prepared presentation materials for an afternoon meeting about a potential commercial loan for a local restaurant chain looking to expand. Around 10:30 a.m., I helped Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow who came in every month to make her mortgage payment in person even though we'd offered to set up automatic payments dozens of times. She preferred human interaction, and honestly, her visits were a bright spot in my routine. She always asked about Amara and shared stories about her grandchildren, and she had a way of making you feel like family rather than just a bank employee. "How's that beautiful daughter of yours, sweetheart?" Mrs. Patterson asked as I processed her payment. "She's doing wonderfully, Mrs. Patterson. She made the honor roll again this semester." Of course she did. Smart as a whip, that one. Take after her mama. It was around 11 a.m. when I noticed a commotion near the front entrance. Through the glass walls that separated the lobby from the banking floor, I could see someone struggling with the revolving door. Our building was beautiful, but it was also old-fashioned in ways that weren't always practical for modern accessibility needs. A man in a wheelchair was trying to navigate through the revolving door, which was clearly not designed with wheelchair accessibility in mind. He was well-dressed in a navy blue suit that looked expensive and well-tailored, with a crisp white shirt and a burgundy tie. He appeared to be in his 50s, with graying temples that gave him a distinguished appearance and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses that suggested both intelligence and patience. His wheelchair was sleek and modern, obviously high-quality equipment. From my vantage point, I could see the frustration on his face as he tried to maneuver through the narrow space of the revolving door. The building did have a separate accessibility entrance, but it was around the side of the building and not clearly marked from the main street. Most people wouldn't know it existed unless they specifically needed it. I was about to get up from my desk to help when I saw Brittany rushing past me, her heels clicking against the marble floor with sharp, staccato beats that seemed to echo her agitation. But instead of moving to assist the man, she stopped a few feet away from him and sighed dramatically, the kind of exaggerated sigh that's meant to be heard and to convey annoyance. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone people use when they're talking to someone they consider beneath them, a mixture of false patience and barely concealed irritation. "This entrance is for bank customers only. The Disability Services office is 3 blocks down on Peachtree Street, next to the courthouse." The man looked up from his struggle with the door, confusion flickering across his face like someone trying to process an unexpected insult. "I'm sorry, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I have an appointment." "Sir," Brittany interrupted, crossing her arms across her chest in a posture that was unmistakably hostile, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is a private financial institution, not a public assistance office. If you're looking for social services or disability benefits, those offices are located elsewhere." My stomach dropped like I'd just been on a roller coaster. The assumption was so blatant, so immediately wrong, that I felt physically sick. The man's face flushed with embarrassment and anger, and I could see the humiliation washing over him like a wave. Other customers in the lobby were starting to stare, some pulling out their phones, and the scene was becoming a spectacle that would probably end up on social media within the hour. "Please," the man said quietly, his voice maintaining dignity despite the circumstances, "I have an 11:30 appointment with your senior management team. My name is Marcus." "I don't care what your name is," Brittany snapped, her voice getting louder and more aggressive. "Do you see how you're disrupting our business? Our clients don't want to be bothered by—" She gestured vaguely at his wheelchair with a dismissive wave that made my blood boil. "This situation. This is a place of business, not a charity." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My hands were literally shaking as I stood up from my desk, knocking over my coffee mug in the process and sending lukewarm coffee spreading across my paperwork. This was wrong on every level, not just the discrimination against his disability, but the racial undertones were unmistakable. A well-dressed white man in a wheelchair would never be treated this way, would never be assumed to be seeking public assistance just because of his physical condition. "Brittany," I called out, walking toward them as quickly as I could without running, "maybe we should—" "Jasmine, go back to your desk," she hissed without turning around, her voice sharp with authority and warning. "I'm handling this situation appropriately." The man in the wheelchair looked at me with such profound sadness in his eyes. It wasn't just about the immediate humiliation, it was the weight of a lifetime of these moments, the exhaustion of constantly having to prove your worth, your right to exist in spaces that should welcome everyone. I recognized that look because I'd felt it myself countless times, that moment when someone's prejudice hits you like a slap and you realize that no matter how well-dressed you are, no matter how educated or successful or polite, some people will always see you as less than. "Ma'am," he said to Brittany, his voice steady but strained with the effort of maintaining composure, "I understand there may be some confusion, but I really do have an appointment. Perhaps you could check your system or contact." Brittany laughed, actually laughed, a sound that was sharp and cruel in the echoing marble space. "Sir, I don't need to check any system. I know our clientele and I know who belongs here. You're clearly lost or confused. This happens sometimes. People see a big building and assume it's some kind of government office or social service center." The condescension in her voice was unbearable. She was speaking to him like he was a child, like his presence was inherently problematic, like his very existence in this space was an affront to the natural order of things. Now, I'm going to ask you one more time to leave before I call security, she continued, her voice taking on a threatening edge. I'm trying to be patient here, but you're disrupting our business and making our customers uncomfortable. The lobby had gone completely silent. Even the usual sounds of typing and phone conversations had stopped. Everyone was watching this horrific scene unfold. Tellers had stopped counting money, customers had stopped filling out deposit slips, and the security guard was starting to move closer, though he looked uncertain about what he was supposed to do. You know what? Brittany continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness that made the cruelty even worse. I'm going to help you out here. There's a McDonald's about 2 blocks away. They have wheelchair-accessible bathrooms if that's what you need. And like I said, social services are just down the street. They open at noon, so you've got a little time to kill. That's when I saw it, the exact moment this man's heart broke. Not just from the words themselves, but from the casual cruelty, the assumption that his presence was somehow inappropriate, the way she'd reduced him to a collection of stereotypes and needs. His shoulders sagged slightly, and for just a moment, his carefully maintained composure cracked to reveal the pain underneath. But then something remarkable happened. Instead of getting angry or defensive, instead of raising his voice or demanding to speak to someone in charge, he straightened his shoulders and looked directly at Brittany with a calm that was somehow more powerful than any outburst could have been. I see, he said quietly. Thank you for making your position so clear. I couldn't stand by anymore. Every lesson my grandmother had taught me about patience and grace was warring with my sense of basic human decency, and decency was winning. Brittany, stop. This is completely inappropriate. She whirled around, her face flushed with anger and something that looked like genuine surprise that I was challenging her. Excuse me? Are you questioning my authority here? I'm questioning your humanity, I said, my voice stronger than I felt inside. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it, but I couldn't back down now. This man deserves basic respect and you're treating him like what, Jasmine? Like someone who doesn't belong here? Because that's exactly what this is. She gestured toward the man again with that same dismissive wave. Look at him. Does he look like he has the kind of money to be a client here? Does he look like someone who would have legitimate business with First National Bank? The racism was no longer subtle. It was right there, naked and ugly in the marble lobby of our workplace, echoing off the walls like a slap. I felt sick to my stomach, but I also felt something else, a burning anger that started in my chest and spread through my entire body like fire. You don't get to determine who belongs here based on how they look, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. That's not your job and it's not your right. Actually, it is my job, Brittany shot back, her voice getting shriller with each word. I'm the assistant manager, and I'm responsible for maintaining the professional atmosphere of this establishment. Unlike some people, I understand what that means. Some people hung in the air like a slap. She was talking about me now too. In her mind, I was just another person who didn't belong in this gleaming tower of wealth and privilege, another person who needed to be reminded of their place. Tom Henderson had emerged from his office and was standing at the edge of the scene, looking confused and concerned. Sarah from accounting was visible through the glass partition, her mouth open in shock. Other employees were starting to gather, drawn by the commotion but uncertain whether they should intervene. The man in the wheelchair had been watching this exchange with growing concern and what looked like resignation. Please, he said softly, his voice cutting through our argument, I don't want to cause any trouble between colleagues. Perhaps I should just. No, I said firmly, turning to face him directly. You shouldn't have to leave. You have every right to be here. I turned back to Brittany, my anger overriding my concern for my career. And you have no right to treat anyone this way. Brittany's eyes narrowed into slits, and I could see her shifting into full attack mode. You know what, Jasmine? I've been watching you for months. The way you act like you're better than everyone else, the way you try to insert yourself into situations that don't concern you. This is exactly the kind of behavior that makes me question whether you're really management material. The threat was clear and immediate. My promotion, my future, my ability to provide for Amara, all of it was hanging in the balance, dangling from the thread of this woman's prejudice and power. And she knew it. She knew exactly what she was doing. Are you threatening me? I asked, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through my veins. I'm explaining reality to you, she said with a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. Some people understand how to navigate professional environments and others, well, others need to learn their place. And right now, your place is at your desk, doing your job, not interfering with mine. The man in the wheelchair was looking between us with growing alarm, clearly realizing that this situation had escalated far beyond his original request for basic courtesy. "Please," he said again, his voice urgent now, "I really don't want to cause any problems between you and your colleague. Maybe I should just reschedule?" "No," I said again, but this time I walked over to him, positioning myself slightly between him and Brittany. "What's your name, sir?" "Marcus," he said quietly, looking up at me with gratitude and concern. "Marcus Johnson." "Mr. Johnson, I'm Jasmine Williams. I'm a loan officer here and I want to personally apologize for how you've been treated. This is not acceptable, and it's not representative of what this bank should stand for." Brittany was practically vibrating with rage now, her professional mask completely stripped away to reveal the ugly prejudice underneath. "Jasmine, I am ordering you to return to your desk immediately. Your behavior is insubordinate, and I will not tolerate it." "Then fire me," I said, the words surprising even myself as they came out of my mouth. "Fire me for treating another human being with basic dignity. Fire me for refusing to stand by while you humiliate someone based on your own prejudices and assumptions." The lobby was electric with tension now. Other employees were openly watching from the banking floor, whispering among themselves. Customers were staring, some of them recording with their phones. Mrs. Patterson, who had been getting ready to leave, had stopped near the door and was watching the scene with obvious distress. "You know what?" Brittany said, her voice getting higher and more shrill. "I think I will fire you. Both of you can live together. You're both disrupting my bank and I won't have it." "Your bank?" I asked, genuinely confused by the phrasing. "What do you mean, your bank?" "You heard me. My bank. My standards. My rules." She was almost shouting now, all pretense of professionalism abandoned. "I decide who gets to work here and I decide who gets to be a customer here." That's when I noticed something strange. Marcus Johnson, the man she'd been humiliating, was smiling. Not a happy smile, but the kind of smile that appears when irony becomes too heavy to carry. It was the smile of someone who knew something the rest of us didn't. "Your bank?" he repeated quietly, his voice carrying a note of genuine curiosity. "That's right," Brittany said, turning back to him with renewed aggression. "My bank. And I'm telling you to leave." "Security," she called out, waving at Mr. Johnson, the security guard. "Please escort these people out of the building." Marcus nodded slowly, then reached into his jacket pocket with deliberate, careful movements. "I think there might be some confusion here," he said, his voice calm but carrying a new undertone of authority. "Perhaps you should take a look at this." He pulled out a business card and held it toward Brittany. She snatched it from his hand with dramatic irritation, clearly expecting it to be some kind of disability services card or social worker identification. "I don't need to look at." The color drained from her face. Completely. She went from flushed and angry to paper white in the space of a heartbeat, as if someone had just told her that her worst nightmare had come true. "What?" I asked, stepping closer, trying to see what was on the card that had caused such a dramatic reaction. Brittany's hand was shaking as she held the card. She looked at Marcus, then at the card, then back at Marcus, like she was trying to solve an impossible puzzle or make sense of information that couldn't possibly be real. This can't be right," she whispered, her voice barely audible now. "What can't be right?" I asked, but I was starting to get a sinking feeling that something major was about to happen. Marcus Johnson reached into his other pocket and pulled out a leather portfolio that looked expensive and official. "Miss Chin, isn't it?" he said, his voice now carrying unmistakable authority. "I believe you were expecting me for our 11:30 appointment." I don't understand," Brittany stammered, the business card fluttering in her shaking hand. "The appointment about your performance review," Marcus continued, opening the portfolio to reveal official bank documents with letterheads and seals that I could see even from where I stood. "I'm Marcus Johnson, the regional owner of First National Bank. I've been reviewing complaints about customer service at this branch, and I decided to conduct some, let's call it field research." The silence in the lobby was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Every customer, every employee, every person in that space was frozen in disbelief. Tom Henderson's mouth was hanging open. Sarah from accounting had both hands pressed to her face. Mrs. Patterson was gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. You're not." Brittany's voice was barely audible, like she was speaking through cotton. "I'm the person who signs your paychecks," Marcus said, still maintaining that calm, professional tone that somehow made his words even more devastating. "I'm the person who decides whether employees like you keep their jobs. I'm also the person who decides whether employees like Ms. Williams here get promoted." I felt like I was in a dream or maybe a nightmare. This couldn't be happening. The man Brittany had just humiliated, the man she'd tried to have removed from the bank, the man she'd reduced to harmful stereotypes and assumptions, was the owner of the entire building. The owner of the company. The person who ultimately controlled all of our careers. Mr. Johnson, Brittany said, her voice now shaking with panic, I had no idea. I didn't realize. You didn't realize what? Marcus asked, closing the portfolio with a soft sound that seemed to echo in the silence. You didn't realize that a black man in a wheelchair could own a bank? You didn't realize that your assumptions about who belongs in this building might be wrong. Brittany opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. There was nothing she could say. Nothing that could undo what had just happened. Nothing that could take back the words she'd spoken or the assumptions she'd made. Or perhaps, Marcus continued, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel underneath, you didn't realize that your behavior was being observed by the very person who has the power to end your career? The other employees who had gathered were whispering among themselves now, some of them pulling out their phones to text colleagues who weren't there. This story was going to spread through the entire bank by the end of the day, probably through the entire Atlanta banking community by the end of the week. I need to call Mr. Reynolds, Brittany said suddenly, referring to the branch manager, her voice desperate and grasping for any kind of authority figure who might be able to save her. He needs to know you're here. Mr. Reynolds is in the conference room upstairs, Marcus said matter-of-factly. He's been waiting for us to join him for your performance review. Along with representatives from HR. The word HR hit Brittany like a physical blow. She actually stumbled backward a step, bumping into one of the marble pillars that supported the lobby ceiling. Was this all a test? She asked, her voice rising in pitch with each word. Not a test, Marcus corrected, his voice patient but firm. An evaluation. We've received multiple complaints about discriminatory behavior at this branch over the past 6 months. Complaints from customers, complaints from employees. I wanted to see the situation for myself. He turned to me and suddenly I was the focus of his attention. Ms. Williams, I've been watching you for the past 20 minutes. Your behavior has been exemplary. You stood up for what was right even when it threatened your own position. That's exactly the kind of leadership this bank needs. I couldn't speak. My throat felt like it was closing up, and my heart was beating so fast I was afraid I might faint. This whole situation was so surreal, so impossible, that I felt like I might wake up at any moment and discover it was all a dream. I understand you're up for promotion to senior loan officer, Marcus continued, his voice now warmer, more personal. Yes, sir, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Consider it done, he said with a slight smile. In fact, I think we need to have a longer conversation about your potential for advancement within this organization. Your willingness to stand up for what's right even under pressure tells me everything I need to know about your character. Brittany made a small whimpering sound like a wounded animal. Mr. Johnson, please, I can explain. Miss Chin, Marcus said, turning back to her with an expression that was perfectly professional and completely cold, what you can do is gather your personal belongings from your office. Your employment with First National Bank is terminated, effective immediately. You can't do this, she said, her voice rising in panic and disbelief. I have rights. I have a contract. You can't just fire me for what? Marcus asked, his voice cutting through her protests. For discriminating against a customer based on his race and disability? For creating a hostile work environment? For violating federal anti-discrimination laws in front of an entire lobby full of witnesses? He gestured slightly toward the customers who were still watching, many of them still recording with their phones. Ms. Chin, you have the right to file for unemployment benefits. Your contract includes a clause about discriminatory conduct that violates both company policy and federal law. You've just violated that clause in front of dozens of witnesses, and it's all been recorded for posterity. Brittany looked around the lobby desperately, as if hoping someone would step forward to defend her or argue that this was all a misunderstanding. But every face she saw reflected the same shock and disapproval. Even the customers looked disgusted by what they'd witnessed. This isn't fair, she said, her voice breaking. I was just trying to maintain professional standards. By assuming that a black man in a wheelchair couldn't possibly be a legitimate customer? Marcus asked. By suggesting he needed social services instead of banking services? By treating him with contempt and disrespect based entirely on his appearance? The next hour was a blur of activity that felt like watching a movie in fast forward. HR representatives came down from upstairs, professional women in dark suits carrying folders and clipboards, their faces serious and efficient. Mr. Reynolds, the branch manager, appeared looking both mortified and confused, clearly having been pulled from other duties to handle this crisis. Through it all, Marcus Johnson maintained his calm, professional demeanor. He spoke with other employees, reassuring them that this was an isolated incident and that the bank was committed to creating an inclusive environment for everyone. He answered questions from customers who approached him, some to apologize for what they'd witnessed, others to commend the bank for taking swift action. Security escorted Brittany out of the building as she continued to protest her innocence, insisting that she'd been trying to protect the bank's reputation and that her actions had been misunderstood. She carried a small cardboard box containing her personal belongings, a few photos, a coffee mug, a small plant that was already starting to wilt. I watched her leave with mixed emotions. Part of me felt a sense of justice being served, but another part of me felt sad for anyone whose prejudices had consumed them so completely that they destroyed their own career. Brittany wasn't inherently evil. She was a product of biases and assumptions that had been left unchecked for too long, allowed to grow and fester until they poisoned her judgment completely. "Ms. Williams," Marcus said to me as the chaos was settling down, "would you mind joining me in the conference room? I'd like to discuss your future with the bank." We rode the elevator to the 20th floor in comfortable silence. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Atlanta's skyline, offering a view of the city that stretched all the way to the mountains on a clear day. The table was polished mahogany that reflected the afternoon light, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Marcus gestured for me to sit across from him at the head of the table. Up close, away from the chaos of the lobby, I could see the intelligence and kindness in his eyes more clearly. There were also lines of fatigue and experience that spoke to the challenges he'd faced throughout his career. "I have to ask," I said, still processing everything that had happened, "how long have you been planning this?" Marcus smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine, very different from the professional mask he'd been wearing downstairs. "About 6 months. We started getting complaints about discriminatory behavior at this branch. Not just from customers but from employees too. Several people mentioned that they'd witnessed inappropriate comments and behavior, but they were afraid to report it formally. Because Brittany was in a position of authority," I said, understanding the dynamic immediately. "Exactly. When people are afraid to report discrimination because they fear retaliation from management, that tells you the problem goes deeper than individual prejudice. It indicates a systemic issue that needs to be addressed from the top down." He leaned back in his chair, looking out at the city skyline. "So I decided to see for myself. I've been doing these unannounced visits at several branches over the past few months, just to get a feel for the actual culture versus what gets reported up the chain of command." "And the wheelchair?" Marcus's expression grew more serious, and I could see pain flicker across his features. "I've been using a wheelchair for 3 years now. Car accident on I-285 during a thunderstorm. Drunk driver ran a red light." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I've learned a lot about how differently people treat you when you're disabled. Combined with being a black man in the financial industry." He shrugged. "Let's just say it's been educational." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it completely, "for what happened today and for what you've had to deal with." "Don't apologize," Marcus said firmly. "You're the reason I still have faith in this company. You stood up for what was right even when it threatened your career. That's the kind of character we need in leadership positions." "About that," I said, feeling brave enough to ask the question that had been burning in my mind, "what did you mean about my long-term potential?" Marcus leaned forward, his expression becoming more intense and focused. "Ms. Williams, I've been reviewing your performance metrics for the past 6 months. Your loan approval rates are excellent, among the best in the region. Your customer satisfaction scores are consistently the highest in this branch. But more importantly, you've shown that you have the moral courage to do the right thing under pressure." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "The banking industry is changing. Our customers are increasingly diverse, and they expect to be treated with dignity and respect regardless of their background. We need leaders who understand that banking isn't just about numbers and profit margins, it's about serving the community and building relationships based on trust." "What are you saying exactly?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. "I'm saying that I'm restructuring the management team at this branch. Mr. Reynolds is planning to retire within the next 2 years, and I need someone who can eventually step into that role. Someone who understands that our success depends on creating an inclusive environment where every customer and every employee feels valued." He opened his portfolio again and pulled out several documents. "Starting Monday, You'll be promoted to senior loan officer with a salary increase to $67,000 annually. In 6 months, assuming your performance continues at its current level, you'll be promoted to assistant manager. And within 2 years, you'll be ready to take over as branch manager when Mr. Reynolds retires. I stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. Are you offering me a path to branch manager? I'm offering you the opportunity to earn that position through your own merit and hard work, Marcus said. But based on what I've seen today, I'm confident you have the character and capabilities to succeed. I thought about Amara, about the conversations we'd had about working hard and treating people right. About my grandmother's advice about catching flies with honey. About every time I'd smiled through a microaggression or bitten my tongue when someone questioned my qualifications. About the nights I'd stayed up studying while Amara slept, determined to build a better life for both of us. What about the other employees? I asked. The ones who just stood by and watched? Marcus considered this carefully. That's a complex issue. Standing by while discrimination happens isn't illegal, but it's not the culture we want to foster. Some people freeze in situations like that. They know what they're seeing is wrong, but they don't know how to intervene safely. He looked out the window again. We're going to be implementing new training programs for all employees. Not just the legal compliance training we're required to do, but real education about unconscious bias, inclusive leadership, and bystander intervention. We're also going to be much more proactive about creating channels for reporting discrimination without fear of retaliation. And if people don't change? Then they'll find other places to work, Marcus said simply. This industry is evolving, Ms. Williams. The communities we serve are diverse, and our workforce needs to reflect that diversity. But more than that, we need people who genuinely believe in treating everyone with respect, not just people who follow the rules to avoid getting in trouble. That evening, I sat in my living room with Amara, trying to explain what had happened at work without going into the more upsetting details. She was 10 years old, but she was smart enough to understand the basic situation and mature enough to grasp the important lessons. So the mean lady got fired for being racist? She asked, curled up next to me on our second-hand couch that we'd bought from a thrift store but that felt like the most comfortable place in the world when we were together. She got fired for treating people badly because of how they looked, I said carefully, not wanting to overwhelm her with concepts she wasn't ready for. And for thinking she could decide who belonged in certain places based on their race or disability. But you stood up for the man in the wheelchair? I did. Even though you thought you might get in trouble? Even though I thought I might lose my job. Amara was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the serious concentration she brought to difficult topics. Mommy, why do some people think they're better than other people? It was such a simple question, but it cut right to the heart of everything that had happened. I don't know, baby. Maybe because they're scared, or because they've been taught wrong things, or because they think putting other people down makes them feel bigger and more important. But it doesn't work, does it? No, it doesn't work. It just makes everyone smaller and sadder. She nodded solemnly, her young face serious with understanding. I'm proud of you for standing up for that man, Mommy. I'm proud of you for understanding why it was important. Later that night, after Amara had gone to bed, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and thought about everything that had happened. The promotion, the salary increase, the new opportunities, all of that was wonderful and life-changing. But what meant the most was the knowledge that I'd acted according to my values, even when it was difficult and scary. I thought about Marcus Johnson, about the quiet dignity he'd maintained even while being humiliated and disrespected. About the strength it must have taken to turn that humiliation into a teaching moment, to respond to cruelty with professionalism and justice. About the burden he carried as a successful black man in corporate America, constantly having to prove his worth and right to exist in spaces that should welcome everyone. I thought about Brittany too. Not with satisfaction at her downfall, but with genuine sadness that she'd allowed her prejudices to destroy her career and her reputation. She'd had opportunities to choose differently, to treat people with kindness, to question her assumptions and grow as a person. Instead, she doubled down on her biases until they consumed her completely. The next morning, I woke up early and spent extra time getting ready for work. I put on my best suit, the navy blue one I usually saved for important meetings, did my hair carefully and looked at myself in the mirror. I saw the same person I'd always been, a black woman, a single mother, a hard worker trying to build a better life for her daughter. But I also saw something new, a leader. When I walked into First National Bank that morning, everything looked the same. The marble lobby, the crystal chandeliers, the revolving doors that still needed to be more accessible. But something fundamental had changed. The atmosphere was different. People looked at me differently. They spoke to me differently. There was a new respect in their voices, a recognition that I'd proven something important about my character. Tom Henderson came over to my desk first thing, his usual cheerful demeanor mixed with obvious pride and respect. "Jasmine, I heard about what happened yesterday. I wanted to tell you how proud I am of you for standing up for that man. That took real courage." "Thank you, Tom. It was just the right thing to do. Not everyone would have done it, though. Not everyone would have risked their career to defend a stranger." He paused, his voice becoming more serious. "And I'm proud that you're going to be taking over my position. You've more than earned it." Throughout the day, colleagues stopped by to congratulate me on the promotion and to share their own thoughts about what had happened. Some apologized for not speaking up during the incident with Brittany. Others shared their own stories of discrimination they'd witnessed or experienced in previous jobs. "I should have said something," Sarah from accounting told me during our lunch break. "I was standing right there, I saw what was happening and I just froze like a coward." "You're not a coward," I told her sincerely. "But next time I hope you'll find your voice. Because there will be a next time, somewhere, and someone will need an ally." "I will," she said, and I believed her. "I promise I will." Around 3 p.m., Marcus Johnson came by the branch for a follow-up visit. This time, he was greeted with the respect and courtesy he should have received from the beginning. He spent time talking with various employees, answering questions about the bank's policies and future direction, and making it clear that the previous day's events were being taken seriously at the highest levels. Before he left, he stopped by my desk one more time. "Ms. Williams, how are you settling into your new responsibilities?" "Very well, thank you. I'm looking forward to the challenges ahead." "I'm sure you'll excel," he said with genuine warmth. "And I want you to know that what you did yesterday, standing up for someone who needed an ally, that's the kind of leadership this bank needs at every level." As he prepared to leave, I had one more question that had been weighing on my mind. "Mr. Johnson, what made you decide to handle the situation the way you did? You could have revealed your identity immediately, stopped the whole thing before it escalated." Marcus paused, considering his answer carefully. "Because then I would have only seen the surface behavior. People act differently when they know they're being watched by the boss. I needed to see who people really are when they think no one is paying attention." "And what did you learn?" "I learned that character isn't about how you act when everyone's watching and judging. It's about how you act when you think no one will know, when there's no reward for doing the right thing except your own sense of integrity." He smiled. "And Ms. Williams? Your character is exactly what this bank needs." 6 months later, I was promoted to assistant manager as promised. A year after that, when Mr. Reynolds announced his retirement, I became the youngest branch manager in the history of First National Bank. But more importantly, I became the leader of a team that truly believed in treating every customer with dignity and respect, regardless of their race, disability, or economic status. The incident with Brittany became a turning point for the entire organization. Marcus Johnson used it as a case study in cultural change, implementing new policies and training programs that addressed not just overt discrimination, but the subtle biases and microaggressions that can poison a workplace environment. He brought in diversity consultants, established employee resource groups, and created safe channels for reporting discriminatory behavior. Brittany herself struggled to find another job in the banking industry. Word travels fast in financial services, and videos of the incident had gone viral on social media with millions of views. She eventually moved to another state and found work in a different field entirely. I never took any satisfaction in her struggles. What happened to her was a direct consequence of her own choices and actions. But I hoped that somewhere along the way she'd learned from the experience and become a better person. I hoped she'd examined her own biases and prejudices, questioned the assumptions that had led to her downfall, and chosen to grow rather than remain bitter. Because at the end of the day, we all have the capacity to change and become better versions of ourselves. As for me, I learned that standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. I learned that true leadership isn't about position or authority, it's about moral courage and the willingness to act on your principles even when it's difficult. I learned that you can't judge a person's worth by their appearance, their disability, their race, or their economic status. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes the person you think has the least power in a situation actually has the most. Marcus Johnson taught me that dignity isn't something that can be taken away from you, it's something you choose to maintain regardless of how others treat you. He showed me that grace under pressure is one of the most powerful forces in the world. Today, when I walk through those same revolving doors at First National Bank, now as the branch manager, I remember that morning when a man in a wheelchair was denied the basic courtesy every customer deserves. I remember how one person's prejudice revealed the character of everyone around her. And I remember that in the end, justice isn't always swift, but it's always possible. Every day, I work to create the kind of workplace where everyone feels valued and respected. Where a person's worth isn't determined by their appearance or their circumstances, but by their character and their contributions. Where standing up for what's right is rewarded, not punished. Where the next Britney Chen will be stopped long before her biases can destroy careers and hurt innocent people. They thought they could judge us by our skin, our circumstances, our perceived limitations. Instead, we showed them the strength of our spirits, the power of our dignity, and the unshakable truth that respect is something every human being deserves simply by virtue of being human. And that truth, once revealed, can never be taken away.